All right, everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Startup to Impact panel. We're going to go and get started, even though they're still finishing up in the plenary session so that we have time to address each of the companies who are joining us today. So first, just want to thank you for joining. I want to thank partners and Chris Coburn for putting on this event. I want to thank the panelists who are joining today and are presenting. I'm James Stanford. I'm a co-founder of Fitzroy Health. We build new companies in partnership with health systems. I have some news to share this morning. The magazine Modern Healthcare published a story about research that Partners Healthcare and Fitzroy Health have just released about benchmarking efforts by hospitals, health systems, and academic medical centers across the country to diversify their revenue. Chris and I are releasing a white paper about that research on the Fitzroy website today. And as part of that study, we spent an awful lot of time looking for companies that are having a real quantifiable impact in healthcare today. One of the most exciting areas, of course, is artificial intelligence, which brings us here today. And glad to find out over the course of this research that beneath all of that hype, there are companies that are doing real work and able to demonstrate real success. So what Partners asked Fitzroy to do was to help select 5 of the companies that we felt were having the most kind of impressive, demonstrable success in the payer-provider world, which brings us to the companies that are here today and the people representing them. And we're going to ask each of them to focus on one number that really speaks to the impact that they're having today. Before we do, I want to introduce my co-moderator, Meredith Fisher. She's a PhD and investor. She's a partner in the Partners Innovation Fund, which is a $170 million fund investing in technologies coming out of Partners Healthcare System. Meredith, I would love to just get your perspective before we kick in to set the stage around, as an investor, what do you think about when it comes to companies you're looking at, especially with respect to how they're leveraging AI in the payer-provider space? What's interesting to you as an investor? And I'll join you up here.
Do you want me to stay up here, or do you want me to?
Okay,
all right,
yeah,
thanks. So, James, thanks for that question, and thanks to our panelists. I'm looking forward to hearing their presentations in more detail, and also to everyone who is in the audience today. Those of you who may know Partners Healthcare and actually have participated in this conference, even particularly yesterday at the first look, one of the privileges of working within this system is that we actually do fundamental basic research while also being a hospital business, while also being a provider, and also having a payer business. So we actually span nearly all of the aspects of healthcare, and we at the fund are interested in investing in all of those aspects of healthcare because the strategic mission of our fund is to put investment dollars to work in areas where partners can actually offer enablements or additional development of technology across that whole continuum. And so this particularly is one where we're very, very interested and very, very excited, largely driven by the fact that there are sort of real platforms here that can offer real critical solutions and to, I think as we were discussing a little bit earlier, fill gaps, not necessarily create new businesses. But really at the end of the day, what we look for as investors is there a product fit? Does it actually fill a gap that we need or an inefficiency that we see in the system? And are there groups that are willing to actually pay for that solution? And so what I hope that we'll hear from some of the companies that we'll hear from just in a few minutes are, what are the gaps that they are seeing that they are filling? How do they actually understand their customer and fit that? And then how do they build the business model around that? Those are critical things that we look for when we think about making an investment into an opportunity. And you need to fill all of those buckets in order to have a viable business that is also venture investable. Given time, I'm going to cut my comments to that and look forward to some additional specific questions to each of them after they have presented. And then at the end, we'll open it up to at the end for questions of the audience, or at the end of the?
At the end of the question.
At the end, sorry.
At the end of the presentation.
At the end of the question, at the end of each of their presentations, we'll also open up to questions from the audience. So thank you all, and I think we have AllazoHealth up.
That's
first.
right. So thank you, Meredith. And Bill Grambley, CEO of AllazoHealth, a company that is driving behavior change using machine learning and patient engagement. So each of the companies will take about 5 to 7 minutes to just give some context on what they're doing, and especially focus on that one number. And Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. So what AllazoHealth does is leverages an artificial intelligence platform to do a couple of things that will help a number of players in the healthcare system, I'll talk about in a second, really optimize their clinical programs, and specifically around patient outreach and patient engagement. So what we do is really 4 things. So one, we predict an outcome, and the predominant use case we have right now is around adherence, medication adherence. So we predict the likelihood that somebody is or is not going to be adherent to a medication. Then, understanding that likelihood of adherence, we go to the next step to prioritize patients for a level of support. And there can be a lot of different factors going on. That prediction could look at data like demographic factors, how far they are from a pharmacy, how synchronized their medications are. But then the prioritization of the patients is often related to their likelihood to engage in a patient support kind of program. Based on that, then, we optimize what interventions the person gets. So, if you think about your own experience with medications, and I'll share one with my own. Great Monday through Friday, right? Get up in the morning, I have breakfast, I go to work, I take medication. Saturdays, it's all screwed up, right? I sleep late, maybe I was out late the night before, maybe I skip breakfast, or maybe I do brunch, maybe I go out to eat for breakfast, and all of a sudden I've forgotten to take a medication, okay? So that's kind of an example of somebody who, in my case, maybe what I need is a reminder on Saturday mornings, or maybe I need to have an app that just tells me something. So we prioritize and define the intervention for that person. Now, you could think of a whole spectrum where, on the one hand, you've got somebody like me, generally adherent, generally reactive to technology. But you could have somebody who recently left the hospital. What they really need is a level of in-home engagement that they otherwise wouldn't get. So again, a whole spectrum. Well, all of that now, so this prediction on adherence, this prioritization of the patients, and then this selection of the intervention for each patient, the results of that whole process get fed back into the machine, back into the AI platform to learn the next set. And so again, over time, you can see how that becomes kind of self-fulfilling and optimizing. And historically, so I worked at CVS Health for a number of years, over a decade. When most companies come up with patient support programs, they tend to have a very rule-driven approach. If you meet this criteria, you get this intervention, or you get this action. And the problem with those is they very quickly kind of cap out on their impact. When we go through this process, what we've seen, and then the one number here is a 5.5 times greater impact. In this study, which was a randomized control trial we did with Blue Cross Blue Shield North Carolina, we basically only changed who was going to get a phone call by a nurse and when that phone call occurred. So we didn't even use a whole breadth of a suite of interventions. We only changed what was predicted around the person, and then prioritized, so who got an intervention, and then the timing of that intervention. And we had a 5.5 times greater impact on the likelihood for a person to be adherent than a traditional kind of rule-based approach that is very common in the industry. And I'll just leave with, within our market space, we currently support payers, many of you very familiar, I'm sure, with Medicare Advantage. They have star ratings that can lead to bonuses for Medicare Advantage plans. So we help them optimize those clinical outcomes related to those star measures. That's the primary use case there. We work with retail pharmacies. Many retail pharmacies are now being incented around adherence related to a performance-based payment. That actually stems in many cases from Medicare Advantage, but they can yield significant incremental reimbursement for their prescriptions if they do well on adherence measures. We also work with life science companies, pharma manufacturers, post-launch, so when they've now launched the drug to the market, and they are trying to support adherence for those patients, we engage with them across a spectrum of interventions that could be digital, it could be phone call, it could be a number of different things. And then in the provider space, so a number of things going on in the provider space. Right now, we're currently working with a New York DISRIP approach, which is essentially a performance-based reimbursement on a provider system. And in that world, again, we're helping those provider groups maximize the reimbursement, which is focused on a patient-level outcome. So with all that, I will turn it back.
Thanks, Bill. One quick question for you before we go to the next person. So recently you signed a partnership with Lash Group, which is a part of Amerisource Bergen. Interested in the strategy behind that partnership, and then just also generally, advice on thinking through partnerships for earlier stage companies, especially those in AI.
Yeah, great question. So within the announcement with the Lash Group, they are a hub service vendor. They work with pharma manufacturers on these patient support kind of programs. And so when our partnership with them kind of allows us to get greater number of pharma manufacturers to leverage our technology. And if you think about how we end up doing these predictions, the more patients and the more data we have, and the more history we have becomes a critical input. So the more that we can kind of get out into the market, the more accurate those predictions will be, particularly when we get into more niche medications. So if you think of the payer space and Medicare Advantage, there's roughly 50 to 60% of the population that has a condition that is measured by these star ratings. But when you're dealing with, total patient populations in the, 10, 20, 30,000 range in the US, it's really important to kind of increase that base of your data. And so our partnership with the Lash Group is a component of that. And then to the second question about, how do you think about partnerships? I mean, sales are expensive. The long cycle time associated with a sale is something that can really eat through your go-to-market efforts. And so a partnership like the Lash Group is a key way to amplify our sales process. And so, it's non-exclusive, so we are looking at additional partnerships, but their sales team now can go out as they are talking to pharma manufacturers about these patient support programs and bring in this concept of really optimizing the targeting of those programs to maximize the ROI.
Great. Thanks, Bill. So next up is Gauss Salomon, from CEO of CLEW Medical. And CLEW physiological predictive models to guide healthcare providers in predicting patients' clinical states. So Gal, would eager to hear about CLEW.
Thank you. So I think a lot has been said about artificial intelligence in healthcare, and somehow it's boiled down to two main messages. Everyone wants to deliver better care and lower the cost. And I had a meeting with one of our investors a couple of weeks ago, which keep telling me that every company is coming with those two messages. And the joke around the industry that you accumulate those numbers, the hospital will run free by now. But today, I want to present you a true case study, which the whole idea is basically to show how we can change the needle, how we can create an impact. But before that, a few words about the company. So CLEW started 3.5 years ago. The source of the name is coming from the Greek mythology, which told about the way that you can navigate the way into the maze using the ball of thread. We believe that medical data is a very big maze, and our intention is basically to create a real new knowledge out of data into the maze. I'm also pleased to be the representative of the Startup Nation Israel. Just came last night, sorry for the jet lag, guys. So I think we have contributed in many of the areas in our life, and I think healthcare is one of the most important one. We have a lot of activity back in Israel. So our story is starting with a lady which is with her late 70s. She had a history of diabetes, UTI, and heart disease. She came for a standard procedure in the hospital, and then she got a fever. She was admitted in the ICU with life-threatening infection, probably sepsis. The team basically started to deal with that with fluids and antibiotic. With the normal procedure, 30 hours later, she became lethal breath. She was intubated, put in a mechanical ventilator. In 36 hours, she developed pneumonia associated with pulmonary, which means that she had in a very bad condition. The team was performing tracheostomy in her, and she was stayed in the ICU for 10 more days following with a very, very long process of rehab. Guys, this kind of event is happening thousands of times every day around this country. And this is one of the events that we have in the ICU. Consider alternative trajectory. She was admitted in the ICU because she had a fever and she had a sepsis. And this is not an unnormal thing. But then 12 hours toward the stay, the team got an alert that she will have a respiratory failure within the next eight hours. The team basically changed the medication and put in non-invasive ventilator, and 48 hours later, she was discharged to the general ward. Guys, this is event, it's not the story. And for a matter of fact, the system is installed not far from here in UMass Memorial. And I really want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Craig Lilly here, which is with us here in the audience. Dr. Lilly is running the ICU program in UMass. And I think thanks to him, innovation like that can happen. So what's next? I mean, we're basically productize the current solution. We have a couple of installation, but then, you know, we're thinking about what is next. So a year and a half ago, we had a very big delegation came from Massachusetts, including the governor, Charlie Baker. He came with a very big, you know, delegation around healthcare. And one of the meetings that I had with the CEO of Beth Israel, which I show him the results and told him about what we're going to do in ICU. And he came and said to me, look, ICU is very important, but this is one problem of many, many others. Come to me when you have a real system that control, you know, the entire universe, from the admission in the ED all the way to the general floors. So this is exactly what we're doing currently. We started to work on a new concept, which is calling clinical command and control, which the whole idea is to have an open environment, like system which every company can plug their own solution, any kind of protocol, any kind of solution that you may have in the market. And the whole idea is to provide for the first time one view that you can see the entire organization from the ED all the way to the general flow, OR, ICU, and PACU. And you can basically manage the entire flow of patient with using power of AI. Thank you very much.
Yeah, let me have this and I'll hit it back to you. Yep. So, Gal, thanks. I think that was just a kind of an incredibly impactful way to talk about the product. I want to pick up on actually one of the things that you alluded to right at the beginning of your talk, which is that you are a startup and a company that originates in Israel. And I think that it's a really fascinating thing that we actually see quite often, which is Israel, as we know, is a center of technology and a center of innovation, but from a healthcare market perspective is a more challenging one, in that the US actually from a healthcare market perspective is potentially both larger and one where you actually want to enter. And so it's great to see that you have both collaborations like the one at UMass, as well as also engagement with folks like the head of BI. I'm curious about how you think about navigating both the challenges and the opportunities of being a global company that is developing a product in one place and delivering it in another.
I think it's an excellent question because, before the session, Craig and I had a discussion around it. So I think in the last couple of years, we realized that technology is important, but for me, which is coming not from healthcare, but I've done a lot of technology in my life. Healthcare is working differently. It's not about the technology, it's about the workflow. It's about the service. And I think the answer is very, very, very easy. We need people on the ground, and this is pretty much what we have started to do. We have people on the ground here, which is a physician, business development guy. So I guess that in the next 6 to 7 months, what we'll see that the R&D and the product marketing is going to remain in Israel. All the other side of the equation, including the physician, is going to be here on the ground, probably in Boston, but either here or close to here. That's it.
Thank you, Gal.
We failed. Come on, I think there's no other way.
Thank you very much. So next up is Pelu Tran, CEO of Fara Health, which is a company that works with health systems using an AI-powered monitoring system to detect medical errors before they affect patient care.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me, or do I need the mic? Cool. All right. I'm going to poll the audience a little bit here. I made sure people here have cars. Let me ask you guys, who here owns a car that has blind spot detection? Raise your hand. Cool. Who here owns a car that has automatic braking? Cool. Who here owns a fully level 5 autonomous vehicle? None of you Tesla owners, raise your hand. It's not there yet. Soon. This is an example of the fact that it is much easier to build monitoring solutions to help prevent regrettable incidents than it is to build full automation. And so when we look at many other industries, financial services, cybersecurity, autonomous vehicles, you realize that the pioneer technologies in these industries are actually monitoring and surveillance and error detection, not automation. There are a couple of reasons. One of them is because it is a much simpler technology to deploy, right? It's much easier, it's much more constrained to find a single issue. Another one is that it doesn't disrupt the end user's workflow. I don't need to change the average driver to deliver these solutions to them. And the last one is that it actually appeals to the risk-averse nature of most buyers. This is especially true in healthcare. So one of our observations, having worked in enterprise healthcare for a while, is that health systems are very risk-averse. There are a whole bunch of ethical questions and issues around really trying to automate and replace components of care. But there was this entire opportunity to actually do the same thing that had happened in other industries, which is to introduce monitoring, surveillance, and error detection systems at a system level into hospitals. So the question becomes, what does that look like in healthcare? What are the sorts of problems and things that we need to monitor for that we have the technology today to resolve? The answer is nothing short than the third leading cause of death in the world, which is medical errors. And as a note, 80% of medical errors are errors of omission. It's the physician not seeing a diagnostic test, not taking the correct action, missing a patient's follow-up. And so taking a simple imaging scan as an example, there are countless ways for a patient to fall through the cracks. The primary care physician could forget to order a screening CT scan for a high-risk patient. The scan could be scheduled, the patient could not show up, and maybe no one ever bothers to reschedule them. You can actually have the patient show up, they get the scan, and it actually ends up being low quality or for whatever reason inadequate scan, and no one ever does it. The radiologist can read it. They could actually look through it, miss the finding, and document it as normal. And last but not least, a patient could actually have a lesion, have it be caught by the radiologist, be referred for follow-up, and then never show up. And all of these gaps, I would argue, are actually far more impactful and affect basically every patient who goes through the system compared to a lot of the efforts around automation we're describing. And so we asked ourselves, how can we build systems that can automatically detect, identify, and help close so many of these gaps that are influencing every patient's journey throughout healthcare? We started off with the most difficult part of all of this, which is trying to reduce diagnostic gaps in care. So identifying when physicians or radiologists initially don't notice a lesion that's present on the scan. It might be an incidental finding of a significant lung lesion on a patient who's in an ED for an aortic aneurysm. It might be one of the thousands of screening x-rays that occur that radiologists just kind of blip through. And when we deployed a system that, rather than changing the radiologist's workflow, ran in the background at all of the hospitals that we work with and reads the doctor's note using natural language and understands what they diagnosed, and then compares that to the image and machine vision that we run on the image to identify when an error of omission occurs. So when the scan contains a lesion that isn't documented by the physician in their report. And when we find a high-risk study like that, we actually flag it and enter it into a quality work list for the quality committee to review. And when we deployed the system, we realized, hey, turns out physicians are not perfect. They make mistakes, a sizable percentage of the time. We deployed the system in a few pilot hospitals across Asia, and within a few weeks, we realized we were catching dozens of clinically significant lung nodules that were being missed by these hospitals. And so we very rapidly expanded. We're now in 5 countries. We're scanning several, over 10,000, approaching 20,000 CT scans per month now. And we're detecting dozens of patients whose care we're able to improve directly without needing to change the physician's workflow, without running into any of the challenges around automation and the ethical issues. And we're able to do so at a system level. So we started this in a very simple, confined use case, trying to find CT nodules that are lung nodules that are missed by the reading radiologist. But we're expanding the solution into trying to detect when patients are lost to follow-up, trying to identify when a scan doesn't meet the proper quality levels and bringing a patient back afterwards. And even outside of radiology, things as simple as gastric cancer on endoscopy, or patients with sepsis who aren't detected appropriately. So one thing I would encourage, and my goal here is not so much to push Ferrum as it is to encourage everyone to think about, are there ways that you can deploy technologies that don't have to disrupt the end user workflow, can be deployed at a system level in a monitoring approach that can close care gaps and help patients today? We believe so. We are deploying these technologies across hospitals in 5 countries, and we're expanding rapidly, both with our own algorithms and with the algorithms of partners who we're bringing onto the platform. So I'll just leave with the fact that patient safety has, for as long as healthcare has existed, it's been a bit of a redheaded stepchild in that, am I allowed to say it in Boston, actually? Sorry. In that it's so often an afterthought. It's so often something that's poorly quantifiable. It's done almost resentfully by someone who's assigned to it. And actually, it's the most important aspect of the care we deliver our patients. So machine learning is giving us the ability to deploy a fundamentally better, transformative patient safety platform with AI that exists today. And so many of these patient deaths and morbidity and mortality that's occurring from medical errors could be eliminated if we can work together to develop these systems that act not so much in an automation or interpretive or diagnostic way, but more of a safety net and monitoring system for physicians. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Pelu. So before you founded Ferrum, you were one of the founders of Augmetics, which is, I think, one of the real pioneers in augmented reality in healthcare. I think now it has something like over 1,000 employees. What have you learned from that experience that you've applied to Ferrum? Maybe one key lesson we can think about.
I think that there are 1,000 different ways to sell the health systems wrong, and there's one way to do it right. And the way you do it right is you have to actually recognize that Hospitals or coalition are kind of combination of decision makers. You need to talk to IT, you need to talk to the clinical decision makers, the business decision makers, and each one of them has a dramatically different order of priorities and dramatically different incentives. And so for us, we have this mission to eliminate the third leading cause of death in the world, which is medical errors. And that only appeals to one of the stakeholders, which is the patient safety officer and some visionary physicians. But you still need to have clear value propositions for IT, for business, for these other stakeholders. And so don't have the time to dive into all of that right now, but really having a thoughtful go-to-market that appeals and has benefits to everyone that you engage with the system is an incredibly hard kind of product marketing challenge that you face, and it's where most companies fail.
Yeah, I think that's especially relevant in that kind of payer-provider space, as opposed to yesterday we're focusing on life sciences, where there are other paths to market, but I hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Pelu. So next up is Brian Symmons, the COO of Gauss Surgical. And Gauss is a company that uses AI to measure blood loss during surgery. So Brian, would love to hear from you, please.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Might need the mic.
Yeah.
Okay. Hear me on? Hello? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Is this on? Hello. Okay.
There we go.
All right, thanks very much, guys, for the opportunity to be here and represent Gauss. A major investigation by USA Today last year concluded that the United States is the most dangerous place in the developed world to deliver a baby. In fact, the US is the only industrialized country in the world with an increasing maternal mortality rate. And while maternal mortality rates decreased 44% worldwide from 1990 to 2015, they increased by 27% in the US over a similar time period. On average, there are 2 pregnancy-related deaths every day in this country, leaving children without a mother, fathers without a partner, and so much unnecessary sadness in what is meant to be one of the happiest moments of life. Unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg, because for every maternal death, there are also 60 near misses, resulting in severe morbidity. Hemorrhage is the leading preventable cause of maternal mortality. The CDC estimates that 70% of hemorrhage-related deaths in pregnancy are preventable. The key is increased and improved recognition and response to bleeding. The good news is there's increasing awareness of this growing maternal health crisis in our country. The Preventing Maternal Deaths Act was signed into federal law at the end of 2018, and it provides resources to states to study the root causes of maternal deaths and also to invest in solutions. And Gauss has developed a solution to help address this terrible trend in maternal health. Since the dawn of surgery, physicians have determined the amount of blood being lost by a patient by looking around the room, taking in the blood that they see, and pretty much making a guess. Now, studies show that visual estimates of blood loss are inaccurate and unreliable. They're confounded by the limits of human visual acuity and also by other fluids that may be present in surgery, such as irrigation, saline, amniotic fluid. This is where Gauss saw an opportunity to address a critical need. So we developed Triton. Triton leverages computer vision and machine learning to determine blood loss in a way that is objective, accurate, and available in real time during surgery. We're taking advantage of the consumer mobile devices that we all carry around in our pockets. And what we've done is we've developed a user-friendly application powered by sophisticated algorithms to turn an iPad into a FDA-cleared Class 2 medical device. And the way this works is that a clinician during surgery will image sponges that are covered in blood or a canister filled with blood, and our algorithms will determine the amount of blood on that object. And as each new object is imaged, we provide an updated blood loss estimate for that patient in real time, and we're providing a clear update that helps provide important information about the clinical status of that patient. And clinical studies published in peer-reviewed publications have demonstrated that our system for monitoring blood loss is significantly more accurate than alternative approaches. So by providing blood loss information in a way that is accurate, timely, and prominent, we're able to provide care teams with information that can help them to identify patients that could potentially benefit from life-saving treatment. Now, Triton is having a real impact today. Triton has been adopted by approximately 50 hospitals across the US, including half of the 10 largest delivery hospitals by volume in the country. And researchers at Hackensack University Medical Center, who studied Triton, found that Triton identified hemorrhages at a 4 times higher rate than visual estimation. And when transfusion was required, blood product utilization was 31% lower in the Triton group. Now, we've also focused on trying to bring the user experience that's typical of consumer products into the healthcare setting to help with the user experience for an already overburdened OR staff. Last year, we were honored to get to be awarded the Apple Design Award. We were one of 10 apps out of 1 million iOS apps on the App Store to receive this award, which represents the best in design, innovation, and technology on Apple platforms. And we're really proud to have provided a model for how AI can be transformed from a technology into a user-oriented solution that's being used by surgical teams around the country. And that brings me to this number. So most importantly, 42,020, that's the estimated number of hemorrhages that Triton will help our customers to detect this year. And we are extremely motivated by the opportunity to help more mothers and families celebrate one of the happiest moments of their lives. Thank you.
Let me steal that back from you. Sorry.
Oh, I think you're on.
Oh, I am. Sorry. All right. So, Brian, thanks. Again, I think you guys have done a great job of actually reducing numbers and telling a story about it. So, you know, if I think about your product and sort of where you're anchored, obviously in the OR, you know, if I'm thinking about your business model and how it could be expanded, not that a VC would ever suggest to you how your business model could be expanded, but let me take the opportunity to ask, how would you think about actually expanding your anchor in the OR? Do you think that there's room for opportunity to grow your product line there? Or do you have a different vision for how you actually want to take the manifestation of your technology, that AI detection and that volume calculation, and deliver it elsewhere within the healthcare system or within the hospital, really?
Thanks, very good question. In terms of how our business model evolves, I think we're probably focused on a few different things. First of all, we've just gotten started with Triton. We've seen good adoption, but we have a lot of work to do. It's really important that we help to make this the standard of care in obstetrics. And to do that, you know, based on feedback from our customers and just our observation, I think what we're working on is really to try to evolve the value that the product offers. I mean, today we're a very accurate and efficient way of getting a number, monitoring a patient and providing an important vital sign. What we're doing next is we're actually building the underlying protocols that hospitals use to manage hemorrhage into the application. So it becomes more of a clinical decision support tool. So based on blood loss values, the clinicians can receive alerts and be prompted as to kind of what to do next. We're integrating into EMR systems and also working on reporting back to provide insights to the customer. So that's step one, is to kind of make sure we do our job right and evolve the product in its current application. We are also looking at other areas where blood loss monitoring is important within surgery. It's a natural adjacency for us to move into. So that's next as well. But then more importantly, overall, our strategy really is to become not just focused on blood loss, but to really solve clinical problems and be a clinical decision support tool, to be a platform that addresses unmet clinical needs in surgery and in the OR. And so there are a few new areas where there are similar levels of unmet need that we think we can address. The interesting thing is with Triton, we've built a category here, like we're creating a category, and that's a burden for a small company, right? We're building this category of blood loss monitoring with technology as an adjunct. There are also categories within medtech where hospitals are spending a lot of money to bring in big equipment, where we think through our model, which is, you know, AI-enabled applications on just standard consumer devices, we can provide the same answer or even a better answer more efficiently at a lower cost with a smaller footprint and actually with a much simpler workflow for the staff. So over time, as we move into those other areas, our plan is to go back to these customers that hopefully we've added some value to and to kind of work with them to build out a platform of applications that they can use in all sorts of surgical disciplines. So, yep.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. And so the final company presenting is Remedy Partners, represented by Ed Zecchini, the CIO, Chief Information Officer. And Remedy Partners helps health systems to manage the organization and financing of episodes of care and bundled payments. So take it away, Ed.
Can you guys hear me, or does this work?
Give it a second. Yeah.
Can you hear me? I think I may need this as well.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, I'm here. I'm going to walk around, if that's okay. First, I want to thank Meredith and James for inviting me to be on this panel, so I'm excited to be here. Story of my life is always last. That's okay. Now, I got a lot of numbers here. You can't invite a tech guy to a conference and not have a lot of numbers up. But before I focus on these numbers, I want to talk a little bit about Remedy. We're a 6-year-old company. We have about 400 employees now after 6 years. About 150 are in the tech group that I'm about to talk about what we do. Remedy is in the bundle payments solution business. We support value-based care. We work with providers, and we work with payers to help patients, to help focus on patients' episodes to increase outcomes and reduce cost. And so how do we do that? So step one is we first work with the payers to understand what definitions they might want to use for a bundle payment program. And so in the case of the government, we work with BPCI, with CMS. Those are well-defined definitions. In the commercial space, those could be off-the-shelf definitions like Prometheus, or they could be customized definitions. We're definition agnostic. And then we work with the providers on the risk-based side of what bundles they should pick, what levers we may use to help improve outcomes and reduce cost. And once we identify for that provider, what bundles they should accept and take the risk on, we go at risk with those providers. Then the fun begins. This is where we leverage machine learning, because once you commit to those bundles, you've got to find patients, right? Find patients, you have to track patients, and then you need to intervene on those patients. And the earlier you can do that, the better you can help the patient on their journey and improving those outcomes and reducing cost. And so what we do is we take a lot of data, and one of the advantages Remedy has with the size we have is we do get a lot of data. We're model-driven, but you can't create those models without the data. And so we take real-time data. We take ADT feeds, we take CDI feeds. They'll come in from our providers real-time. We'll take that data, we'll stream that data against our models through the probabilistic models we have, and we're doing this real-time, and we'll try to find patients. And in the BPCI program, if folks are familiar with that, the bundle payments for care improvements, 86% of the individuals accrete into an episode, right, in the ED, right? So they didn't think they were going to have an episode that day. They end up, and so it's very important you find them right away. And so when we stream that data, we'll take those feeds live. We're getting about 30 million a month now, and we'll find patients, and we'll go against our predictive models. We'll find patients, we'll predict what bundle they're in. We'll also stratify their risk. So we'll look at these models, and we'll take the patient's data. We'll create a longitudinal record of that patient, and we'll express that back to the facilities, to the providers, so then they can intervene, and we'll also offer up content. So as soon as somebody enters the hospital, let's say somebody goes in and they have an event, and then maybe it's COPD, they walk into the hospital, within 20, 25 minutes, we know where they are in the hospital. We'll make a prediction of what bundle we think they're in. We'll risk stratify them, and then as they move through their journey, we'll then also offer up next site of care. We'll look at that individual. We'll say whether they should go home, or should they go to a SNF. We'll then offer up what performance network they should go to based on that particular individual. And this is all leveraging machine learning and being predictive within 20, 30, 40 minutes of this data coming in. We're starting to sort this out, and we're helping the clinicians to move this patient through their journey. We then continue to track them post, make sure that they're going to the right place, that if they're in the post-acute, we're managing their length of stay. We do assist the post-acute with our own employees that also help monitor this data and make sure that this patient's having the right care at the right location. And so maybe I should just move into some of these numbers now that we have a lot of numbers here. For Remedy, to date, we have about 6,000 physicians participating in this program. We have a post-acute network of about 1,300. We've got 480 hospitals participating. To date, we've managed over 500,000 episodes, so we found 500,000 patients in these episodes and helped manage them. We've cumulative almost 15 billion in spend that we've been managing to date, and our network has about 1,000 endpoints at this time that we're getting this real-time data in. And I think the most important stat is, as we talked about results, is we're seeing about a 9.5% savings on that book of business, which is real results that are happening. And you'll see some other stats in this is showing that we're avoiding readmissions by 10+%. We're managing the length of stay. We're reducing that by 12%. And we're even, another 10% is just avoiding getting these folks into the right facilities. And then the third part, I think the important part of machine learning is once you have this data and you're managing it, and then how do you manage the performance of that network? So another piece that we offer is the performance and the outcomes. And then that creates that virtuous circle. So when we're done, we're constantly looking at how are they performing. And then we can go back and take that data, retrain the models, and continue to get more improvement. And so this is just over the last 4 quarters, but over year, the 6 years, we keep seeing an increase. We can then create more models, more predictions. Again, it's important that we increase outcomes and that the patient is first and foremost. But as those outcomes increase, obviously the cost is being reduced at the same time. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ed. So Ed, a question for you. Health systems are increasingly, slowly but surely taking on more risk.
Yes.
And if I'm the CFO of a health system, that's scary.
Yes.
And so what is it about kind of Remedy in particular and AI applications in general that can make me feel more confident about essentially buying more risk?
Yeah. So first of all, the great thing with this program and these kind of episodic-based management programs, you are sitting with the CFOs and the CEOs to start with. So it's coming from the top down, which is great. I think what's important is you have to match the clinician side of this. So everything that we're doing and all the predictions that we're making, they're clinically based. And in fact, we're doing peer reviews. We have a whole clinical department that then will publish. We've published papers. And that's important to bring that to these hospital systems to say, hey, look, this is science, but it's peer reviewed. And so we can get the clinicians on their side feeling comfortable with the suggestions we're making. So the expression of what we're doing could end up in an EMR. The expression could end up in a proprietary software. They could be leveraging what our product is called Episode Connect. But they have to make sure that those suggestions are clinically sound, and that helps them to take that risk. And then, of course, these proven, the result up earlier shows that those results that are clinically proven are working. And so that is helping them take risk. And again, we're with them, so we're sharing that risk. We have skin in the game. The provider has skin in the game, Remedy has skin in the game, and the payer does. So that actually helps us all come together and helps to change behavior, and that's been working.
Thanks, Ed. Great. So now we'd like to open it up to the audience to ask questions, and Craig will be walking around with the microphone. So raise your hand if you have a question. While we're getting to the first question, Meredith, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we've observed, particularly for, and I think James' last question was a nice tee up to it, is a willingness by a lot of systems and providers and healthcare systems, hospitals, to take a risk at a pilot scale, right? It's something that's confined. It's something where they can see some data and they can get comfort. And then you actually have to convert to, let's call it a real sale, right? A major sale, one that actually offers recurrent revenue or just revenue at all. And so I'm curious because we have quite a spectrum of folks in the different stages of development of their product as well as their business. if each of you could maybe briefly talk about how you think about that, making that conversion. And I'll start, Bill, right here directly on my left, because you alluded to it a little bit in your conversation, your answer to the question earlier about the length of sale, as well as also what it takes to get there.
So yeah, interesting conundrum we have, particularly I think in the AI space where data is by itself valuable. And in fact, just a very recent example where we were talking with a company and they wanted to do a pilot, and if you start to think about the fees associated and the amount of data you have with a pilot, that can be really challenging. I think there is value from it, and I think that's also part of the reason why we had invested in doing a randomized control trial that got published, is because you can start to break through the concept of a pilot by showing a level of proof that, independent of just my marketing slide, right? Somebody actually reviewed this and believed that the data that was represented in this trial was valid independent of us. So I do think that is a mechanism to go around it. I also think in many cases, if you do a pilot, then the impact size you need to have is much greater than if you actually do across a large population. So it is certainly a balancing act, and one that ideally you can get through with case studies, the RCT that I mentioned, other things like that.
Great. Do we have others from the panel who'd like to comment on that? All of you, perhaps?
I can jump
We only
in.
have 10 minutes.
I can
Okay,
jump in.
right.
So I think, I have to thank CMS for starting this pilot program, for really leveraging episodes of care and bundle payments. And that really became the pilot for us. And having that being a voluntary program and having folks enter that program over time has really opened the doors for commercial business now to really understand, the value of bundle payments and how it affects value-based care. So in our case, we had a great partnership with CMS that really, it really was innovative for them to start this program, and it's really helped roll the ball. So we thank them for that.
There's an interesting statistic from a few of our customers that I think folks who aren't in the industry can be surprised by, but the internal cost to a mid to large size health system to deploy a free pilot is somewhere between $500,000 and $700,000. And so even for a free pilot, the reason why you get so much friction is because it's not free. It's actually $500,000 burn for them. And so actually, even when they assess a pilot, I think, if you have a key stakeholder, the chair of gastroenterology who just is able to shove it through, that's one way. But actually, those type of pilots are almost doomed to failure from the start. So you actually have to go into a pilot with a clear understanding of the business proposition, the ROI, and either fee for service or if they happen to be Kaiser value-based world. And you actually have to start off with that, because otherwise you're going to finish a pilot and then spend another year trying to get a hold of the CFO to explain what you do.
Or if you can go at risk, and there is no spending up front, and you're offering a SaaS-based service, and you're going at risk, and that does help move a pilot along a lot quicker.
Then you have to be funded to be able to do
You have to be funded.
You're right.
Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, I think we all are worried about death by pilot in that respect. Audience question, please.
Thank you, guys, for sharing your story. So, question for Brian. So, how do you really monetize the AI? So, you have a fantastic tool. You're a Class 2 medical device as well. What's the reimbursement strategy, and how do you really get the power of AI into commercial success? So, I think you're doing a great job in saving lives. So, thank you for that.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Good collaboration. So very good question. Our business model is actually software as a service, so SaaS, like a traditional maybe software technology company. And the way that it works is we essentially license the software based on the number of systems, which is based on the number of rooms that they're going to be, labor and delivery rooms or ORs they're going to be using the system in. And they pay this monthly subscription fee. And we do have to the point earlier, go through an ROI process with the hospital. Sometimes it comes out of an operating budget. Sometimes they seek to find money from a capital budget for it. But it's today, not a lot different than selling software or capital equipment into a hospital. There is no incremental reimbursement for this, so we have to demonstrate an ROI. And we do that by looking at not just theoretical ROI, but we actually pull from the clinical studies that have looked at the clinical impact of our product. So savings in transfusion dose and blood product utilization. We have 1 or 2 studies that actually demonstrated potential association with reduced length of stay, as well as fewer days in the ICU. And then more broadly, hospitals, at least for the blood loss monitoring and obstetrics, this is actually it's a mandated patient safety sort of never event. They never want to have a maternal mortality. And so in the short term, that's our business model, is we're going in and selling the return on investment to the appropriate people after we get the clinical buy-in. We are actually, now that we're layering in additional capabilities to our product as well as additional products, we're also sitting on a lot of data and information and insights that the customer can benefit from, looking at additional ways to monetize that over time as well.
Thank you. Meredith, I have a question for you on the business side. A lot of hospitals and health systems are getting into the investment in startup companies, all kinds of companies, and often using the technology or trialing the technology in which they're investing in. And how do you draw that line between appropriately investing and keeping arm's length with the implementation on the clinical side?
Sure. So that's actually a pretty easy question for me to answer, which is that we at Partners and at the fund draw a very bright line. So unlike some other hospitals, which you may have seen some coverage in recently, we will not invest in a company if the company is planning to trial at one of our hospitals, because it creates an inherent conflict. And so that is something that actually is a strong line for us in the way that we think about that. Now, whether over the time that may shift a bit because we start to see a need for being able to sort of, buy what we create as well, I think that will be probably something that we continue to have a conversation about. But I think Partners in particular feels very strongly about making sure that we manage that conflict by not actually creating it.
Question in the back there, or in the middle.
I had a question for Ed. I think many of us are familiar with bundle payments and quote unquote standard procedures like hip replacements, knees. Could you talk a little bit about what are some of the more innovative areas that you see where bundle payments might be coming in, and what are some of the challenges in implementing it in some of those other indication areas?
Yeah. So moving into commercial, right, when you want to get more medical and procedural episodes, it becomes a little bit difficult, and that's why a lot of people haven't scaled in there to find out what those levers are, what those triggers are. Now, there's a lot more advantage in the commercial area over BPCI, because you can get those folks right before, it's really the first site of care, right? So if you're getting those pre-auths and you're getting those claim data and you're building this longitudinal record of this patient, and then the trick is really understanding what those triggers and levers would be for all those particular bundles, and then offering up, obviously, the interventions with content. And that's where Remedy is moving now. So we've got a couple of things coming, and you'll see in the next couple of months, where we're working with some commercial partners, and you'll see some things around that. But that's really the next challenge, is how do you leverage those benefits, or how do you leverage those episodes and then put them into an insurance product? So ultimately, that's what we see happening, is where we can then kind of narrow that network. You have a broad network, but then you narrow it down at the point of service based on that episode, and then you're offering up the best of facilities that work specifically for that individual, based on all that machine learning and what those interventions may be against those triggers that fire against that episode. And that's something that Remedy does offer. And so that's the next challenge, and doing that consistently across a lot of medical and procedural episodes is pretty complex. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Chris Sanders. Hey, just a question for all of you guys. Selling into large payers and then health systems, what was the biggest challenge? I mean, we already talked about pilots, but what's been one of the biggest challenges for you guys working with enormous health systems as a startup?
You will start.
I guess I'll start. So I'm actually going to go back to what Pelu said, which is the number of stakeholders and the complexity of the sale. We've literally been involved in a sales process for a year, from time of kind of initial conversations where they believe the initial marketing pitch to signing a contract, and even when you get to the point of quote signing a contract in large organizations in a HIPAA regulated environment where everybody has concerns about risk and privacy, just quote signing the contract can take a month or more, right? So that process to me is super challenging, and one that you really need to have a pretty strong internal way of managing through all the stakeholders, all the processes, et cetera. So from our perspective, I think that's the biggest thing I've seen.
I think we are seeing two types of issues. I think the first one is, as you mentioned, I think it's a very, very long process. I think from the first time that I met Craig when we progressed, we came and said, guys, I mean, how long is it going to basically will take us to put the agreements together? And he said, if we're fast enough, it's going to take a year. And for me, as coming from the consumer electronics space, that was absurd. I mean, there is no sense of urgency. Nothing is really moving. And he was right. It took us, although we're pushing like crazy, I mean, it took us a year because the amount of committees and guys and approval and everything else, basically. And this is one of the major challenges. The second challenge is basically, dealing with the EMR, privacy, those kind of things, especially if you're dealing and you need to dig inside Epic and try to pull, real-time data which are coming from so many sources and have the ability to recalculate everything in 50 millisecond resolution in the cloud. It's a nightmare. I mean, and especially if you're digging inside the EMR and you're not taking the information directly from the monitor or from the hardware. So those are the main issues that we're seeing.
Should we continue, or
Keep going.
Well, briefly, I think A.G. Breitenstein over at Optum Ventures said this really well, which is there are millions of problems that can be solved in healthcare. Healthcare isn't something where you can't find problems, and so I actually think hospitals have, I'll call it the luxury of an almost unlimited number of problems to solve, and as a result. Like if you think about, do I need to provide a business ROI? Do I need to provide like a clinical value case? The answer actually is both. And decision makers almost always want to see both something that's going to improve patient care and also have a strong ROI. And I think most solutions end up in one bucket or the other. And you can kind of tell from this panel that the ones that have successfully deployed have both a strong clinical value proposition and a strong ROI financially. I think that's a dichotomy that most people starting off don't really understand or appreciate why it's the case.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great point to end on. Thanks, Pelu. Sorry, Brian.
I had so much to offer on this. Same.
Being conscious of time and knowing everyone needs to get on to their other things. But this has been a great panel. Really appreciate your insights. Great to hear about your companies doing really exciting things. So let's give everyone a round of applause, please.
Good job with everything.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think I was on time.